Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey, and my guest today is Key Jefferys of OXEN. Now, we are not related, we swear to God. We just found out that we have sort of the same last name, and we have nothing to do with one another. It's the first time we're meeting, just so everybody knows. So hello, Key, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. Very strange coincidence because I feel like Jeffrey and Jeffries aren't very common names, and my first name even less common. So
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I get all kinds of weird spellings like Geoph. Like, it's amazing that people can't spell Jeffrey. I have no idea why, but anyway, I don't know if you experienced that, but that's oddly been my experience.
yeah, I've had a few IES like Jeffries.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, everybody calls me Mark Jeffries anyway, so it's, I feel like we have the same last name.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's jump into to OXEN here. So OXEN. So I read up on it. I didn't really know a lot about it. I had someone from your end reached out to me, I think on Twitter, and I didn't know much about it. So I poked around at it, and it looked interesting. So I said, let's talk and find out what it's all about. As far as I can tell, it's a proof of stake privacy coin. You've got a couple of apps already built on top of it. So it's more like you've created this sort of node network for privacy apps, and the crypto is sort of how everybody gets incentivized to run the nodes, if I've got that right. But why don't you tell me what you're doing instead of me trying to figure it out?
No, I mean that's pretty much correct. For people who have been around the crypto space a while, they may be familiar with the project called Dash. And Dash did a very similar thing where they kind of took this core of Bitcoin, and then they built this masternode network on top of it, which was essentially these nodes that would run. They would be required to stake a certain amount of Dash, and then they would provide services to the network. And we took that idea, but we applied it to a privacy coin. So we took Monero, essentially, and built this second layer of network nodes on top of Monero. On top of a base of Monero. We're a fork of Monero, technically. And particularly focusing on that second layer of nodes, but we're providing privacy services there. So the logo right behind me is an app that we work on a lot, which is called Session, and that all runs on top of this network, which is incentivized by OXEN, or powered by OXEN, the second layer built on top of OXEN. So yeah, we really are super into the privacy space and super into building privacy enhancing technologies on top of this second layer.
Got it. So I was going to ask you how it compared to Monero. So it's the bones of it is Monero, at least the crypto piece of it, and the privacy network piece, I'm guessing, has nothing to do with it. It doesn't pull any code from Monero at all. It's a completely different layer, right? So tell me.
Correct.
So is that like it's sort of like its own TCP/IP layer-ish thing? Like tell me about what's going on there.
Yeah, so once you once you have the base layer, which is the blockchain layer, and then you have this kind of incentivized network of nodes on top of that layer, and we have about 1,800 service nodes, which are run by all different operators all around the world, and they're all kind of geolocated in different places. Very similar to running, say, an Ethereum validator, where you take a certain amount of Ethereum, you block it up into a node, and then you perform services for the network. In the Ethereum's case, it's validating the Ethereum chain and producing new blocks and stuff. But in OXEN's case, it's doing that as well, because we're a proof of stake chain, so creating new blocks and stuff, but then also storing messages for Session, or routing packets for Lokinet, which is the other big service that we run on top of the Onion, or on top of the node network. So yeah, there is a networking layer that allows the service nodes to communicate with each other, and then there's also a layer which allows clients to communicate to service nodes as well. So for example, one of the biggest jobs that the service nodes do right now is store messages for Session. So if you download the Session application in the store, you'll actually be communicating with the service node network, and every message that you send gets sent to a special group of nodes who will store those messages for a particular amount of time. And that's kind of taking a model that would work in a centralized way with a centralized server, say Signal, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, they all have a central server. But instead of doing that on a central server, we use the OXEN service node network to decentralize that task and allow this network to handle that message storage.
So it's kind of like a Napster of messaging, and you basically got like a routing. I know, sorry to use like an old guy metaphor here, but that's sometimes where my brain goes. So yeah, I mean, it feels like I'm not as deep on sort of the tech of how, I'm going to ask you what an onion server is in a moment because I don't know, but it sort of feels like you've basically got some sort of routing table with all these nodes, and they know how to pass things along, the kind of the Pony Express, and I assume everything's encrypted as it gets passed along, so nobody can look at it, and then the packets end up on the other end where they're reassembled and decrypted. I assume that's basically how it works for the messaging piece.
Yeah, so with the messaging piece on session, all of our messages are end-to-end encrypted for passing between the individual clients. So one client will encrypt for another client. But then on the network layer as well, we use onion routing, which means that you're actually encrypting at least the final destination address for the final hop in the network that you'll go through. So that's another piece that we do. And then we have our own onion routing network as well, which is called Lokinet. So there's quite a bit that goes into it. But yeah, the basis of the network is that the service nodes are registered on the blockchain. They register their IP address and some ports at which they're listening at. And then those service nodes will communicate with each other to pass messages from one another. And also clients have access to the service node network as well. So they know the IP addresses that they can talk to start talking to the service node network. So that's the basis of the communication layer. It's not really like a distributed hash table like you might see in, say, the BitTorrent protocol or something that's more peer-to-peer.
Yep.
Because we have a blockchain, we don't really need to have a distributed hash table because we have this kind of decentralized data storage where we can put routing information up there, and we know it's immutable as long as the nodes stay within their consensus bounds.
So if I want to use your messaging app, I don't have to know anything about your blockchain. I just go download it on. Is it in the Apple App Store or is it just on Android?
Yeah, it's on Google Play. It's on the Apple Store. We have a desktop application, and it's also on F-Droid, and you can grab the APK just directly from the website as well. So lots of distribution methods. But yeah, you're right. You don't need to know anything about OXEN to start using Session because none of the interaction with the service node network requires that you have a currency or anything like that.
Right. Okay. Well, that's super cool. And so I read somewhere that you have 100,000 users of Session. Is that correct?
It's actually a lot more now. So I think we're pushing 450,000 monthly active users on Session.
Wow. Okay.
This month. So yeah, we've really picked up a lot of steam. We picked up a lot of steam in the Iranian protest movement that happened a few months ago. I saw a lot of Iranians coming onto Session because some of the messengers that they may use in their country, they may not be happy with how secret that they keep their messages. And also found that the onion routing aspect and the no phone number registration aspect as well with Session was a really big draw card because with a lot of these messages you need to put in sensitive information like your phone number, and that can be tracked back to your individual. So I think a lot of people appreciated that aspect of Session.
Yeah, if I was in Iran and basically if I get caught, I get beheaded. I think I'd be very concerned about whether the app was registered to my specific phone number and phone, and whether there was any personally identifiable information whatsoever associated with my account. And with yours, there is none. And as you point out, with some of these other services that are end-to-end encrypted, they have centralized servers. So, who knows what can be garnered from that, but probably you can kind of sleuth through the traffic there and kind of more or less figure out what's going on, even if you can't actually get the actual message content because that's encrypted. But you can kind of follow you can draw the little pinboard lines between people, be like, oh, look, person A talks to person B a lot. These are probably those two people, right? So, yeah, so all that goes away.
There's so much metadata these days, and having centralized services have access to that, especially as you were talking about kind of like temporal information about when people message other people, but also just access to people's raw IP addresses or raw phone numbers can really make the process of tracing who those two people who are communicating really are. Because we use our phone number in so many contexts these days. Like basically every service that we sign up for asks our phone number. And then those databases will get leaked every so often. There'll be a big hack and the phone numbers will leak against the usernames or the user's actual name. And then hackers or governments will just look up against those databases, this phone number belongs to this username or this person. So you're immediately de-anonymized in that sense.
Yeah, yep, totally hear that. Okay, so if I want to use your coin, where do I get an OXEN wallet? And I assume that's a phone wallet. It's standalone. Tell me about the wallet situation.
Yeah, so we have two primary wallets right now, which is the OXEN mobile wallet. So that's on iOS and Android. You can just download that from the App Store. And then we have a desktop wallet as well, which includes a command line interface, but we also have a GUI for it as well that people can use. If you want to download them, just go to OXEN.io, and you can find the wallets pretty easily there.
Okay, cool. And then one other question, actually, sort of a math question. So I went to your site, and I did see that you have 1,800 nodes, and the reward schedule is 16.5 OXEN per block node rewards. And then you also somewhere else said 2,400 OXEN per year. So do blocks take 2 days to produce? Like, how does that? The math doesn't seem to work. What am I missing?
It may be inaccurate on the website. Maybe we haven't updated something. But generally, the process, how it works, is there's an ordered list, and each service node starts kind of at the bottom of that list. And once a service node reaches the top, it gets its reward, and then it goes back to the bottom of the list. So there's a block every 2 minutes. So there's a service node rewarded 16.5 OXEN every 2 minutes, which means every other node will move up the list one by one until every node is rewarded, and then the list, reorders.
Ah, okay. So that might be what's going on here. So, yeah, so it may actually make sense. Yeah.
The actual calculation for amount of OXEN emitted per day is so every 2 minutes there's 16.5 OXEN emitted, but for the service node network. So you can divide that, by the day if you do 2 into 60 and then 60 into 24, and
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So let's talk about Lokinet because, and let's talk about what an onion router is, because I'm actually not familiar with those terms. Unless you're like a deep privacy geek, you probably haven't run into those things. So tell me what an onion router is, and then tell me about Lokinet.
Yeah, so there may be some people familiar with Tor, which is a privacy service, and that is in itself an onion router. But for people who aren't familiar with the idea, there's these things called IP addresses, and basically every computer that is connected to the internet either has a unique IP address or it may be sharing an IP address with a, say, for example, if you're on a university campus, you may be sharing an IP address. But most home devices will have, or most homes will have their own kind of IP address. And this IP address is something that your internet service provider, whether that's, Telstra, Viacom, Comcast, whatever you guys use in the US, they'll know your IP address, whatever IP address you've been assigned. And that's related with the information that you used to sign up to whatever provider you had. So IP addresses essentially become this unique identifier that users will have on the internet. And whenever you have a unique identifier on the internet, you start to worry about whether people can trace as you move in between different websites, for example, or as you use different services. So these days people are very concerned about their IP address being exposed, and they're starting to use a lot of VPNs, which most people would be aware of these days. That's what VPNs do. They hide your IP address. And they essentially hide your IP address by talking to another server in another location, and then that server talks to whatever you want it to talk to. So say you wanted to go to facebook.com, you talk to the VPN server, and then the VPN server would go and request whatever it was from facebook.com and then bring it back to you. The problem with this model is that there is a single party involved there's a single trusted party, which is essentially your VPN provider. If your VPN provider starts taking everything that you've done and logs it, they can start to get an idea of what your actual IP address is doing. So it has a single point of failure. Onion routing models basically split up the trust between 3 different servers or multiple different servers. And basically you send your request to a first hop, who sends it to a second hop, who sends it to a third hop, and then it reaches its destination.
Ah.
So at one point in time, no server has a full picture of what you're requesting or who you are. So the first hop knows who you are, but it doesn't know what you're requesting because it's sending it to the middle hop. The middle hop only knows the hop before it and the next hop. And the last hop only knows the destination, but doesn't know who sent the information. So you kind of split up the trust between, you know, these different servers who are unrelated to each other. And that's kind of that's the simplified idea of onion routing.
That was pretty clear. I understood that fully, so thank you for that. Yeah, well done. So now tell me a little bit about Lokinet, because Lokinet seems like the next generation of your secure messaging app. You're just now gunning it up to video and voice and things like that, like sort of telecom stuff. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so we see Lokinet as being really important for Session because we're going to integrate the kind of applications together at some point. Right now, Session does use onion routing, but it uses a really primitive layer that can't transfer voice and video information. It does use the service node network, but it's like it's like a baby implementation of onion routing. It's very secure, but very slow. That's how I put it. So the ultimate goal is to get Lokinet working inside of Session, because Lokinet itself is a much more versatile protocol. It can handle all different types of protocols, not just TCP IP information. It can handle UDP information, and people may be familiar that most video streaming protocols or voice streaming protocols are built on top of UDP, which is this kind of network.
It's a layer below TCP IP. So for those who don't know, there's actually one more subterranean layer below it, and it's a lot faster. But I think it's less secure. There's a trade-off, but it's definitely faster.
I mean, one of the main things is that it doesn't do kind of like this packet retransmission stuff. Like TCP IP tries to get every packet to the other person and it tries to make sure all of them are like correct and ordered. So it has this like acknowledgement protocol, and that adds a bit of overhead, which means that it's not so good for voice and video calls. Whereas UDP kind of just sends all of the stuff at once and then doesn't worry about like retransmission or anything like that. That's handled by the actual application or a layer above. So anyway, Lokinet's like more versatile essentially and faster and has a lot of advantages compared to what we're using right now. So we do see it as the next big step in Session. But by itself, it's also a very cool protocol as well, and you can use it very similarly to as you would use a VPN. So you can shove all of your internet traffic through Lokinet if you want to, and anonymize your internet traffic that way. It's not as fast as a VPN because obviously it has those 3 different hops in between, which each add latency to the path. But it is more secure and it runs in a less trusted environment than a VPN does.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, got it. So I had a look at your market cap and all that because I like to at least review this sort of information. So you guys have been as high. OXEN has had a market cap, during the heyday, like when market caps were through the moon. You guys were up to around 100 million at the peak, and right now you're floating at around 10 million, which is good because I think the people who watch this show, I mean, the thesis of this show is let's talk to just weird, interesting shit before most people know about it. The last time I did a version of this show, I talked to Vitalik about 3 weeks before the Ethereum ICO. So found that, and nobody cared about him or it at the time, right? And it was weird. It was like some Russian guy like, send me your Bitcoin, and in a year maybe I'll send you some other coin, right? And so it didn't really totally feel legit, right? So, but the more we talked to him, the more I was like, yeah, there's something here. So we participated in it. Thank God. We all wish we'd put a lot more in now, knowing what we know. So so you might, so 10 million is still pretty early days, right? I think that was about what the market cap of Ethereum was during the Ethereum ICO. It was either 5 or 10 million. I can't remember which. But anyway, so basically this could be a gem, folks. Not financial advice, just pointing that out. It's 10 million. It's a low cap right now, and this.
Yeah.
So far, you sound very cogent and legitimate, so I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's something that we definitely want to work on improving as well because we feel like our value is much higher than the $10 million
Sure.
Market cap indicates. So, like, one of our really big goals for this year is to push the market cap way higher. And personally, may be a bit arrogant for me to say or something, but I feel like we belong in the top 100 just because of the amount of development work that we've been doing, the products we have, and how many users we have in our products. So I think really now it's about translating all of the development, all of the effort that we've been putting in, and getting people through the door so they understand the vision too. So super bullish on the future, and I hope this year's going to be really good for us.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got 500,000 users of your session messaging app, and you've got 1,800 nodes. You have real product that takes real engineering, and you have real consumers actually using it. Some of them, their life is dependent upon it, and so it must work well. so those are all that's a lot more than a lot of crypto protocols have going for them. As someone who studies them, when you actually dig into the numbers of people who are actually using it, it ends up being very low. It's like sort of in the low, 10,000, maybe even single digit thousands sometimes, depending what it is.
I think there's a tendency though, and I've been around the crypto space for a while now, probably 4 or 5 years, and I think there's a tendency from at least the venture capital world to overvalue projects that haven't delivered on anything yet because the potential is so high. Because before user numbers actually come in the door, founders can sell a vision about, this is going to be the next biggest thing. And then when the actual protocol launches, it's generally underwhelming what the person or the founder actually said. But that lends to these kind of crazy valuations, billion-dollar valuations on companies that don't have any users yet. Just because they can sell this potential that they will have that. Whereas protocols like us that have been running for a few years and have actually gone through the hard yards to get the users, venture capitalists look at us and say, oh, well, we kind of know what the growth schedule for them is going to be like. It's going to be kind of a slow and steady race. It's not like this infinite kind of potential thing that we see with the new projects. So I mean, I think that'll change though. As the space gets less frothy in the VC aspect of things.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who lived through the dot-com bubble and burst, the stuff that was getting, I feel like we just lived through the dot-com bubble of crypto, and back in those days, things like the Globe.com and Tripod, had large valuations, and they basically were worthless, but they for whatever reason it caught the imagination of the investing community, and I think there's some good ideas in there that got slashed along with a lot of really bad ones. But then the second wave of the cycle was a lot of quality ideas rising to the top. So I think you're well positioned. So you had to suffer through the idiot phase, and then I think the quality phase is the one that comes next, where the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, all those things rise and are saluted for the quality that they are. So I think you're well positioned for that. So I think the other thing I was going to ask you is, what exchanges are you on right now? I know you're on it looks like OKX and CoinX is kind of it. You're on a few DEXs, I think, as well. I think you're just on Uniswap. But tell me where we can find your coin.
Yeah, so KuCoin and Bittrex are probably the biggest exchanges.
Okay.
Most people may have an account with. We also have wOXEN, which is kind of an Ethereum wrapped version of OXEN on top of Ethereum, and that has a Uniswap pool which trades it as well. So those are probably the best options to get in right now. We also have TradeOga for those people who are very interested in privacy exchanges. No one outside of the privacy world has heard of TradeOga, and they're a very strange exchange, I must say. But if you're into that, why not?
Yeah, no, I've actually never heard of it, so it's weirdly, even if it's off my radar, it's well off the beaten path. So I will now have a look at it.
Story with them, they just kind of popped up out of nowhere, and no one knows who runs it. It's still completely anonymously run, and they basically only trade privacy coins as well. So it's a very niche exchange, very weird place.
Yeah. So the question I was going to ask though is, so you guys have built your own chain, and I see why, because you want the guts of it to be Monero, and so the regular sort of let's just fork up another EBM isn't going to quite work for what you guys are doing. But what you give up with that is sort of the, I guess, the composability, the fragmented liquidity. In other words, there's not a scene on your chain the way there is on, well, say, Phantom. I was just out in Florida for Quantum Miami, which really was kind of Phantom Fest in most ways. And what was kind of great about that was all these protocols, all linking together and stacking on top of one another and doing things with one another. You guys don't have that, I don't think, right? So what is there a DeFi scene at all on OXEN?
No, because we don't really have smart contracts on OXEN.
Oh, got it.
Because Monero doesn't really support that
Right.
at the base layer. I mean, for us, our philosophy was kind of that we wanted to have privacy at every layer of the stack. So
Yep.
we have obviously the most user-facing applications, Session and Lokinet. They're both privacy applications and don't require phone numbers and all of this stuff. And you go another layer down, like the service node network, the service node network is obviously built to be end-to-end encrypted and private in how it communicates. And then you go to the bottom layer, which is the OXEN network, and that's a privacy coin. So we kind of wanted to have privacy at every layer, and I don't think there's a very good private blockchain right now which has smart contracts. I think they're secret, but basically they just run everything inside of an Intel SGX, which is not the best way to do things. I think the way that it's looking right now, though, I think, is that scalability and privacy are starting to have an intersection with the zero-knowledge proof stuff that's going on. And I think that's probably going to be the future for privacy blockchains, is that most of them will transition to a zero-knowledge proof model. And then they'll be able to be extremely efficient, but also private in that not every transaction needs to be revealed. So that's probably the way that it transitions in the future. But on the composability aspect, we don't have it now. We want to see more, and actually the project that one of our sister projects that kind of came out of OXEN over the last few years is called Chainflip, and they're kind of aiming to bridge more core protocols together. So for example, bridging Bitcoin to Ethereum or Ethereum to other EVMs and stuff like that in a secure way. So I think there's work happening in the space. It's not our focus. It's not our focus right now. But I think it's definitely important. And I think what you're saying before is you definitely addressed the point. Like, it's a real community builder to have an EVM compatible chains. There's just so much infrastructure built around, like, the EVM and other chains as well, like Solana and I don't know, what are the new ones? Sui or Move?
Near. Sui or Sway or whatever that. Yeah. Yep. What all the new hip kids are talking about these days.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm trying to help you here because I'm kind of like, I like what you're doing, and I feel like, so you do have wrapped OXEN on Ethereum. Is there a bridge that you can actually bridge back and forth, or is that something you hand cranked on your end?
No, there's a bridge. It's run centrally by us, which is not the greatest. Like, I really hope that some of these lines between, because it does feel like, for example, Monero feels like it's on an island, OXEN feels like it's on an island. These protocols that build their own blockchains that are not EVM compatible usually feel like they're very off on their own island. And I think there are protocols out there which are going to start taking down those islands. They're going to start running boats in between the islands, ferries. And I think ThorChain, Chainflip, Wormhole, well, I don't really like the design of Wormhole.
Probably not Wormhole.
Layer Zero, stuff like that is going to start blurring the edges between the different projects more and more.
Yeah, no, that's sort of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe you shouldn't worry about, and I think that's what you guys have concluded, you shouldn't worry about getting your own scene going on, but you just need to have bridges in and out to the other scenes. You can be the bridge and tunnel crowd that goes into New York, but you could still get the advantages of New York as long as you have a bridge or a tunnel, right? So
Exactly.
So that's fine, I think. Okay, very cool. So I have a friend of mine who attends the G20 and now there's some word for it, the Crypto 20 or something like that. But it is an official part of the G20, and that is where the FATF the Financial Action Task Force, I think it stands for. They don't like being called FATF, but too bad. They're FATF in my mind. But the FATF are the people who make the rules internationally, or put it this way, they come up with the suggestions internationally that all the banks and all the countries follow. And pretty much if you don't follow these suggestions, you end up on lists with the kooky countries like Iran and North Korea. And so if you're a bank or you're in a country, one of these countries, you want to basically implement those suggestions. Now, the FATF, the last I heard from my friend Mark Pesce, and he chaired these meetings on a couple of occasions, the last one in Japan, and he basically tells me that the vibe there is they're going to require all crypto addresses that interact with protocols to be KYC'd. And this is not here yet. We don't know, we don't know when or if it'll definitely happen, but that's the vibe. That's what they want to see happen, which would seem to be in direct opposition to everything you're doing. So what do you think happens if that happens, and how likely do you think that is to happen?
I haven't followed the regulation space probably as much as I should have. Like I'm the CTO at OXEN, so I focus a bit more on the technical side than I do on the regulatory side, but I am interested in it. I wonder where the intersection falls between enforceability of some of these rules and the actual application of them. It's all good and fine to pass a rule, but if you can't enforce it, then it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of rules, for example, that countries will try to impose on other countries that they just ignore. And there's methods of resolving that conflict, and that's why we have these World Trade Organization and these organizations that try and resolve these conflicts. But ultimately, it comes down to the enforceability of these things. And if anyone can just create an address and start sending transactions completely either anonymously or pseudo-anonymously, I doubt that you're going to be able to enforce that. It doesn't.
Well, I think what they'll do though, Key, is they'll basically tell the protocols and the exchanges, unless these addresses on this whitelist that have been KYC'd, if it's not on this list, it can't connect to you. So you can't convert your coins back into fiat, and you cannot interact with DeFi protocols or exchanges at all unless you're on the whitelist. That's in their heads. That's what they're thinking.
I would say they can definitely do that at the exchange level. That would be very easy to enforce. Well, actually, I wouldn't say very easy, because exchanges will set up in jurisdictions which will still allow them to run these rules. So there's nothing stopping an exchange setting up in Curacao or St. Kitts or whatever haven there is that doesn't enforce this rule, and then serving whatever customers they want, for example. And there'll be a huge demand for that as well. If people have no other way to get into fiat, there'll be a massive demand for that. So I would say jurisdictional arbitrage is an important consideration when you're considering what's going to happen to the exchanges. On a protocol level, we should be designing protocols such that they do not have the power to enforce these rules on us. So for example, Uniswap has their official front end where they can do whatever they want. They can have whatever KYC list, you can't interact with Tornado Cash, whatever they say goes. But also Uniswap code is open source, so anyone can start their own front end, anyone can launch their own smart contracts and then interact through those. So I think if it becomes overburdensome on the application layer, we can fork away from those protocols that are applying censorship. And on the exchange layer, I'm not so pessimistic, because I think there's always going to be a jurisdiction which sees it as advantageous monetarily for them to provide a safe haven for crypto exchange into fiat. It's just like there's tax havens that exist in the world, even though the World Trade Organization or the EU will try and set a minimum tax rate in their jurisdictions. There's still jurisdictions that will fall out of that, which will allow countries to do that. So,
okay, well, if we go and make these things such that nothing can be enforced upon them, then you are in the position of Tornado Cash Guy. And Tornado Cash Guy, this was like a new escalation. We've never seen some shit like this, where a dude just wrote code, and it was privacy code. It's true that criminals used it also, but criminals kill people with a spoon. Doesn't mean we outlaw spoons. It just means that you can't use a spoon to kill people. That's all. And that's sort of so. Tornado Cash guy got arrested. I think they didn't charge him with anything, and I think he just was sort of sat in jail for a while. Then they let him go, but it was enough to sort of scare the shit out of anybody writing code. What is your reaction to that? And does that give you pause sometimes when you're writing your code?
I don't know the full details of the Tornado Cash case enough to make a comment on it, I don't think, because everyone's saying that he just wrote code, but no one actually really knows what he was charged with or what they brought him in on. It may have been the case that, yes, he's developer on Tornado Cash, but maybe someone came to him on Telegram one day and said, hey, I'll pay you like $100,000 to help me use Tornado Cash. I've got this money that I obtained by selling weed or something. And he thought, okay, well, this is like a fairly minor crime, but technically that is like now you've aiding and abetting money laundering or something, right? Like, right. I don't know the exact situation there, so I hasten to comment on it exactly. If they did arrest him just for writing code, then that's bullshit. Like, that's crazy. But we need to find jurisdictions that will allow that to happen. I don't think that you could do something like that in the States just because of the First Amendment, because writing code has already been recognized as a form of freedom of speech, and obviously you can't limit people's freedom of speech when it comes to writing code. And that's already been legislated. So I think there's not too much to worry about in the US on this. I know he was arrested in the Netherlands, and maybe they have different laws. But I think it comes back a little bit to the jurisdiction thing. I think there will always be jurisdictions which will have strong free speech protections. I very much hope this. This is something that we really need to keep core to what we allow in our countries. But if there is jurisdictions which will allow that, then code should be considered speech, and then you shouldn't be able to limit the code that people write. Hopefully that tradition continues. If it doesn't, then I think we're going to have a lot bigger problems than just cryptocurrency.
Well, I'll be running from apes on horsebacks hunting us if that happens. Exactly. So we'll have bigger problems. Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's where it'll go. So, okay, well, we're almost out of time here. So, where are the websites and the Telegram? Or just give me the websites and the Twitter handles where people can find you.
Yeah, so if you're interested in OXEN, the coin, it's oxen.io, and you can find all of the information there. We also run Session, which is a private messaging application, as I spoke about before. The website for that is getsession.org. And then if you want to find out about Lokinet, that's lokinet.org. And then you should be able to find all of the links to the other social medias from there as well. Big Twitter account we have is Session. I forgot the Session Twitter name. But if you just look at
I'll put it in the links. I'll put it in the show notes so people can find it. So, all right, Keith, man, thank you so much. I am a fan of what you're doing. So I hope it succeeds wildly. I'm going to grab some coins myself. It's not financial advice, but I like to tell people when I do things, right? And you choose your own adventure, but this is my adventure, and this is what I'm choosing to do. So Key, once again, thank you. My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We will see you all next time.
Thanks, guys.